Okay, in this video, we will discuss some very important questions and issues about banking, business banking. And today we are inviting our friend Skylar Reidel to discuss these important issues with us. And he has much experience in US banking and offshore banking as well. So welcome.
Thank
Yeah,
you. It's good to be back, Yongming. Appreciate you inviting me. And I'll say so. My experience is both partially as a customer of banks and also as an attorney. And I'm sure we'll talk about my experience as a customer here in a bit.
yeah. Um, and as business owners, we all need uh, bank accounts, obviously, and there are so many. There seems so many options in the US because there are a lot of banks. And
Yes.
any general tips about how to choose the right bank for the
Good question.
business needs?
That's a very good question. So I'll start with my philosophy and just kind of throw it out there. Maybe it'll help folks. So my philosophy in choosing a bank has been to look for a bank that is strong in your region. Um, I prefer smaller banks as opposed to national, larger banks, just because, in my experience, they work more personable with me. When I go into the bank, they know me by name. They'll sit down and ask about how business is going, and whatnot. I can refer clients to them, and they usually will take care of them if they can. So from a size perspective, I typically go for smaller banks. And the size can vary from local to there's only one or two in your town to regional, where it covers a metro area or a region of the U.S., all the way, of course, to national banks, where they're everywhere in the country. And typically, I choose regional banks. So beyond the size issue and the geography, I will also look. I do actually look at whenever I'm opening an account. I do actually look at the bank's public filings. So banks are required to publicly file their asset sheets and information about where their assets are being held, how they're being held, how much money they have in their accounts, and so on. And I do take a look at that. I typically try to choose more conservative banks that will have a larger proportion of their deposits on reserve, which means they have more cash in the bank, essentially, as opposed to things like stocks and bonds and stuff like that, other investments. And I do that just because, obviously, I don't want my bank, taking risky investments, right? Because it's my money that they're doing it with. I'm looking for a bank that will hold a bigger portion of it so that I don't get into a situation where my money is at risk because of poor decisions by the bank. But luckily in the United States, that hasn't been a large risk in general since the Great Depression, really. There aren't a lot of banks that are failing, and if they do, there are programs that protect depositors for quite a bit. So the risk of that is low, but just me being an attorney and a conservative by nature, I don't want my money at risk. So that's one of the factors I look for. So that's what I would recommend to folks in general. Look at it from a geographic standpoint and convenience for you, and then also just look at how the bank handles your money. And then beyond that, a factor that I typically have not looked at too much, just because it's normally I can get what I need locally and regionally. But another factor for people would be convenience in regards to if you're overseas, or if you are managing something remotely, business-wise or accounts, then obviously having online banking and having access to certain online banking capabilities is going to be very important to you. So that would be the third factor I would certainly recommend to folks.
Yeah, I believe the the way you are doing things are um, perfect for people who are local, who are within the US.
Yes,
And
yes.
for people who are overseas, there will be another
It's a
way.
different way. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yep.
different way.
It's going to be much more based on convenience, right, and the capabilities of that bank. So absolutely, that's the way I do it, and certainly I understand that the portion of factors that I consider important are going to be completely different for people who are not in my situation.
Yeah, the good news is I'm seeing a lot of online banks
Yes.
emerging these days. Yeah, like Mercury or Novel. They
Yep. There's Revolut
yeah,
is one.
from what I can tell, they work with um, traditional banks. They work with a bank with maybe over 90 years of history,
Yeah. Yeah.
but they now have a website that is online banking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so there's a trend we can see.
There's a huge monumental shift going on in finance and banking right now, and technology is driving it. So online banking is absolutely one that's going to continue growing. You mentioned Mercury. There's another one, Revolut, I think, out of the UK. There's a third out of Estonia that I'm hoping that they come to the US this summer that I would like to bank with. Is called Plasma, Plasma Pay or Plasma Finance, and they have some great products that I really like, but they're not available in the U.S. yet because of regulations. But there's a huge trend in shifting to digital services. Another interesting change and shift is what's called decentralized finance. I don't know if you're familiar with that, DeFi, right? And it gets kind of thrown around with crypto, which is not exactly crypto, but what it essentially is it is making banking services more accessible to people around the world at a lower cost, and for it to be easier to use. And I think that's really going to be the future for really people around the world. Americans, we're spoiled. We have all of our banking needs taken care of. We can go do stuff anywhere. But frankly, around the world, it is not easy to have a bank and go visit a banker, to have access to bank products like loans or certain types of investments. And decentralized finance hopefully will bring those services and those products to people at a wider scale. So I'm excited about that. I'm really excited about the future of banking and finance. That's not my primary practice area, but I think in the future it's going to be very important for a lot of business owners.
I know you
Excuse
are
me.
looking for overshore bankings in like Panama.
Yep,
Um,
yep.
why do you need an offshore bank um, for your situation? Because all of your business, most of your business is within the U.S. Why do you need an offshore?
Good question. This is we're going to get into some interesting topics, I think, with this. So the answer to that is, why do I need it? Frankly, I probably don't. I could do everything I need to in the United States, but the way that I see the world, the way that I like to handle risk, and I analyze the risks that I take or that my money takes, I like to have a wider perspective on the world, have a wider footprint in the world, a wider footprint in regards to my holdings, my finance, my banking. So that is the primary reason for me personally why I like to bank internationally as well, because I see that there are significant geopolitical risks with having all of your funds, all of your income, all of your assets in one country or even one bank, or in one region potentially, and even in one currency. That's another, the dollar is changing, right? And its impact around the world is changing very quickly. So me as an American, I need to take steps to make sure that I'm not locked out of certain regions of the world and certain business investments around the world just because I want to use the dollar. I got to learn to adapt and work around the world with people from a multitude of backgrounds. So that's the primary reason why I would do that. So a reason why potentially our listeners or the audience would be interested would be from a risk factor as well. If they feel like their home country or their assets they're holding may be at a certain risk portfolio that's unacceptable, or they feel like there's too much risk, offshore banking can help lower those risks, whether that's from potential lawsuits or business in the U.S. or from their home country if they want to diversify out of that country or even a currency. So really for our listeners, it would be based on a risk analysis is why they would explore international banking or offshore banking.
Is there any specific reason that you are looking at Panama, this country?
For me personally, I like Panama a lot because it has the Panama Canal. Obviously, it's a major trade hub for the Americas, and it connects Asia to Europe, Asia to Africa, and of course both coasts of the Americas. So it has a fantastic geography. What's interesting is that it has its own currency, but that currency is pegged to the dollar, which is good and bad in some respects. But what it does is that for people who are using the US dollar, it essentially eliminates exchange rate risks, what's called arbitrage. You won't risk losing a portion of your fees or your funds or whatever because of fees or costs associated with transferring your money. So geography, I like their business laws. They have very pro-business attitude and atmosphere there. They welcome investment. What's really fantastic too, I think, is that they have a free trade agreement with the United States, and they are actually in the 5th or 6th round of negotiations with China to have a free trade agreement with China, and I'm hoping that they work with China and complete that in the near future. And I think that will really position them as a power player to have a trade agreement with two of the largest markets in the entire world that they can do business with very low cost and at a competitive advantage to anyone else. Will really make them attractive from a business standpoint.
Talk business banking, and as you already
Sure.
know, my bank accounts have been shut down recently.
Yep. Yeah.
For whatever reason, I don't know. I
They
tried to
won't
call
tell you.
them this
Yeah.
morning, and they didn't answer the phone, so I don't know. And I know you have similar experience.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
I have hard time understanding this. Why does it happen?
Yes. Yeah. So so let's dig into the why. I'll tell my personal story with it after. So the why, this is going to be a bit of a long winding road here, but essentially the United States over the last 40 years has been implementing what we refer to as anti-money laundering legislation, anti-money laundering laws and regulations. It started in the 70s with the Bank Secrecy Act. Then the next big one was the U.S. Patriot Act in 2001. And then actually this year we passed another one. I forget the name of it. I think it's the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2020, something like that. Very generic. But that has also brought in a whole new slate of rules and regulations. So generally, those laws, those rules and regulations have laid out obligations, requirements to banks and to institutions or businesses that handle money. So banks, currency exchangers are covered by these laws. Money remitters, so that's companies like Western Union or Zelle, I think is one. Those companies at MoneyGram who send money across borders. All of them are covered. Securities brokers, oddly enough, are covered as well. In many countries, the United States, not yet, but probably in the near future. But most countries, attorneys are also covered by that. They have to follow these rules and regulations. So that's what the rules. That's where the rules came from. That's who it affects. Now let's get into what the rules are. And basically, what it does is that it requires banks and money businesses to know who their customer is. That's the term, KYC. Know your customer. And what that requires is that a banker needs to know who you are. They need to verify it. They need to know what you're doing. They need to verify that. And then they have to do what's called a risk analysis. They need to look at who you are, what you're doing, and whether there is risk that you potentially could be breaking either anti-money laundering laws or breaking a policy of the bank or involved in something else that is too risky for the bank's portfolio or for the bank's customer list. And that is very general. That's very in a gist what is happening. And what happens to individuals like yourself and even myself in the past is that our activities are not typically our identities, but maybe an aspect of our identity, but usually it's because of our activities. Some type of activities that we're undertaking as a business or as an individual will raise red flags with the bank and their anti-money laundering department. And once those red flags are raised, if we don't have, if you answer questions the wrong way, or you submit documentation that they feel is too risky, you fit a certain risk portfolio, they will then take steps to close your accounts. So yeah. So that is in a gist what has happened. Now I'll tell you what's very frustrating for you, as you have experienced, as I have experienced, and as lots of folks have experienced, is that banks are not allowed to tell you why they're closing your account. They're not allowed to tell you when they file reports. So as a quick aside, whenever you do something that raises your risk profile with the bank, typically that's a transaction in the United States, the bank or that money business will need to file a suspicious activity report, an SAR, or sometimes called an STR, suspicious transaction report, to the U.S. federal government. So they file reports on you, and the banks are not allowed to tell you that they filed these reports. They're not allowed to tell you that you don't fit their risk profile. They're not allowed to tell you why they're closing your account. So there is a wall of secrecy, essentially, between customers, what they're experiencing, and the bank's policy decisions. And it's extremely frustrating when you're on the other side of that wall and you don't get answers. But unfortunately, that's the way that our banking system has developed to address anti-money laundering risks.
So now I have a concern. Will this report affect my business in the future?
Probably not, no. So there are tens of thousands of SARs and STRs reports filed every year to the federal government. A fraction of them, I don't recall exactly, but something like a 0.5% or something are ever actually used in a proceeding, some type of criminal or civil proceeding. So it doesn't mean that anything's going to happen to you, but what it means is that it's on file. And if in the future, if there are a certain number of other reports that are filed, or if for whatever reason there's some type of an investigation about you, whether criminal or civil, the federal government and other government entities will have access to those reports and to see more information about you. So it's not used typically to reach out and grab people or to accuse them of something. It's used later by law enforcement typically.
I see. So for a business owner, we need obviously we need a backup plan.
Yes, yes.
Because your bank account could be shut down for obviously no reason, and you don't know how, when, and for what transactions.
Yep.
So,
yep.
Yeah. What's your recommendation about the backup plan?
These are all very good questions that I face anytime that we have to deal with this. So I'll tell you. So one quick note I'd like to make is that it is. I wouldn't say that it's for no reason. It may be a reason that's not apparent to us, but banks, they are making a decision based on some reason, but they won't tell us. So I don't want folks to think that banks are just going around and closing people for no reason, but they do have a reason, but you're not going to know it, unfortunately.
Okay.
So beyond that, the answer to your question about backups, the simplest, of course, is to have bank accounts at multiple banks. That's what I have, a couple different bank accounts at different banks. Of course, I like to do mine locally, obviously, and regionally. Nationally, it's always great to have some accounts at a national level as well. Those are going to be your baseline backup plan, right? Have multiple accounts across different banks, and they don't necessarily all have to be business accounts. You can open up a personal account at a national bank and just use that personal account, and then have your business account somewhere local. And should it become necessary, then you can go back to your national bank and say, hey, I need to open a business account, and they can usually do that rather quickly for you because they already know who you are, they're already working with you, and you can do that in a much more streamlined manner. So even just having your personal accounts and your business accounts in different banks is typically a good step. Beyond that, I know we talked a little bit ago about offshore banking. Diversifying overseas is always a good idea. And even diversifying outside of banks. And what I mean by that is if you have a business that is generating certain types of revenue, maybe from online courses like your own Yongming University, or even my business, I accept receipt payments from overseas and whatnot. If you have something like that you don't necessarily need a brick and mortar location and credit cards in hand, you can utilize other fintech options. There are things like PayPal. What I mentioned earlier, Plasma Pay is one that's used outside the U.S. Revolut. There's others that will process payments for you, and you don't necessarily need a business bank account with them. Oh, another one is Wise, which used to be TransferWise. I've used that to work with folks internationally. So beyond diversifying amongst many banks, also diversifying among different types of fintech or financial institutions, I think is a good move as well. And I do that as well. I have business bank accounts, but I also use Wise. I also use PayPal. Stripe is another one out there too. So those options are something I would utilize as well as a backup plan. Now, you're not going to be completely immune from your accounts being shut down from PayPal or Stripe or these other online banks or something. But obviously, the more options you have, the more quickly you can adapt to any changes that are imposed upon you.
Okay, great tips. So very helpful information, and
Excellent.
Yeah, that's what every business owners need to know.
Yep. I can share my story if you like. I don't know if that's interesting to folks. We can keep it brief if you want. So I'll tell the audience my experience with bank anti-money laundering laws. So I've banked at my personal bank where I have my personal accounts. I've banked there since I was probably 14, 15, whenever I got my first job. I've banked there personally. A number of years ago, I started a consulting business to work with foreign investors in China, invest in the United States, with some partners on that. And we opened an account at my personal bank with a business, with that entity. It was an LLC. And explained, look, we represent foreigners, but we do business in the United States. We represent them in the United States for trying to buy things here, whatever, business, land. We're not taking money, in China or anything. It's all based in the United States. We explain that to them, but also explain, look, we work with foreigners. We work with in particular Chinese nationals. And this was probably 2015 or so, maybe 16, give or take. And I opened the account, and within, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks, maybe 3, it wasn't very long, they unilaterally shut down my account. And I think I got a letter saying they were shutting it down, and a day or 2 or 3 later, I got a check in the mail of what was in the account. So by the time I got the check, it was a day, I think the day before I left for China for a month to do business in China. Obviously, I work with this consulting company that we just started, and we had a lot of difficulty trying to handle that check, because then they wouldn't allow me to put it in my personal account. But I'll spare everyone the details, but it is, I understand how frustrating it is. I've dealt with it before. I'll just tell folks that unfortunately that is the nature of our banking system, and there are many options for you as you're searching for banks, and there are ways that you can help mitigate your risk with the banking institution you're with. And if you have questions about that, reach out to Yongming, reach out to myself, and we can walk you through that. But as Yongming and I both know, it will probably happen to you at some point, and it's not fun. And you just got to persevere and find the next solution for you. Don't get discouraged.
That's a small obstacle on the road.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. I think we've done well with the interview.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you.